Welcome to Class 9, Lesson 9. We have one more left. And this class is entitled Alternatives for a God-Related People. Reading 7 and reading 8 deals with public worship and covenant renewal in Deuteronomy 26 through 29. And reading 8 deals with the appeal for covenant loyalty, Deuteronomy 29 through 30. We start with public worship and covenant renewal, and that's Deuteronomy 26 through 29:1. Letter A says the promised land, and that's, you see it there. This first confession deals with what we touched on last week a little bit towards the end of the class. The confessions that are taking place, these are ordinances, or this is what Moses is telling the people. It's to happen once they enter into the promised land. So this is what takes place once they enter, which of course Moses won't be a part of, but Joshua, he's also part of all this. He'll be the one heading up all this. So the first confession deals with the first fruits. It's actually a ceremony of worship. As we read in verse 10 of chapter 26, it says, "And now I bring the first fruits of the soil that you, O Lord, have given me. Place the basket before the Lord your God and bow down before him." There we see this is again a public worship ceremony. It takes place in the promised land, and all this that transpires in this chapter right here, those verses 1 through 11. This is to help the people, the Israelites, remember. And the key word there is, I think we went over this over and over again, I think since David even taught a class, it was remember. It's constant reminders. And this is to help them, this worship ceremony was to help them remember, again, everything that God had done for them since he pulled them out of Egypt. So this is a constant reminder. And they go through the whole thing of, even in verse 5 when it says, "Then you shall declare before the Lord your God, my father was a wandering Aramean, and he went down into Egypt with a few people and lived there and became a great nation, powerful and numerous. But the Egyptians mistreated us and made us suffer, putting us to hard labor. Then we cried out to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our voice and saw our misery, toil, and oppression. So the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with a great terror and with miraculous signs and wonders. He brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey." And then verse 10 we already read. So there we see, he gives an account of everything that took place. So there, it's an act of worship which serves, I guess, for us also today, that they not only spoke these words, but then they acted with the first fruits, with the offerings as they take it. I guess it's an example to us that worship should not only be worship, should not only be our words, just, which God does require us to worship with our words, but also not only in words, but in deeds. And this is an example where it shows us they literally, with their words, spoke everything. And this was supposed to be like a private ceremony where it was between them and the priest. It wasn't like the other ones that we read in the past. It was for the whole nation. This is for each individual. And it's a time where I could see them reflecting everything that had transpired and then speaking and saying, "Lord God, you brought us from here." Everything that He did for us, that He did for them. Speaking it out, but then with an action, you see them walking it out with the first fruits, their offerings, giving the best they had to God. So there's a good example of how our worship should be. Again, so the first thing here we see, the first thing that God wants for them to do when they get into the promised land, the first thing, like we read in verse 10, is to worship. Not to do this or that or the other, but the first thing is worship. We see so much importance in that. And of course, like I said, the right kind of worship is in deeds and in words. And sometimes I guess we could be lopsided with we could get so busy with even church stuff, and like the story of Martha and Mary, where we're so occupied doing the things for God, and we kind of forget to put time aside for actually Him. He knows it all. We know He knows it all. He knows our thoughts, but I think He still does want us sitting by him, like Mary, by the feet of Jesus. And he wants to hear our words. That's where our words come in. Like, Lord, you know what? You're my everything, and just worship him. But then at the same time, working. So it's a good balance to always remember works and deeds. And when we speak of, I guess, love, we speak of faith, and we speak of worship. All of them do require words, speaking faith, but then acting it out. Because faith without action is dead. Number 2. The second confession is that every third year, the tithes were kept at home and they were not taken. I'm sorry. Yeah, promised land and remember. So the second confession, which is in chapter 26, 12 through 15, is again, every third year, the tithes were kept at home and they were not taken to the central place of worship. It was done every year, every third year, and there they kept it. And now, the first is we see worship unto God. They gave the first fruits, the best they had from the land that God had provided them. They gave it to God there in the worship. This one deals with, again, like we said last week, talking about loving God and loving our neighbors, our fellow man. This one deals with our fellow man, again. And the tithe, it was a tithe declaration every 3 years, and it was done in the promised land. So in the same way that they were held in account to do this every year. In the same way I put here, we also are one day going to have to give account to all that God has given us. With our, every 3 years. Yeah, every 3 years. And there they gave it to the Levites, and the Levites went ahead and gave it to the orphan, the widow, the needy, everybody who was in need, they gave it to them. And that was not to be touched. That was sacred. They wouldn't touch it for nothing. No matter what happened in those 3 years, that was not to be touched. Not to be touched at all. B, we go to mutual commitments between God and Israel and covenant renewal. That's chapter 26, 16 through 19. And this is, I labeled this here, a ceremony of affirmation. And it says, at the end of chapter 26, the Lord your God commands you this day to follow these decrees and laws. Carefully observe them with all your heart and with all your soul. You have declared this day that the Lord is your God, and that you will walk in his ways, that you will keep his decrees, commands, and laws, and you will obey him. And the Lord has declared this day that you are his people, his treasured possession, as he promised, and that you are to keep all his commands. He has declared that he will set you in praise, fame, and honor high above all the nations he has made, and that you will be a people holy to the Lord your God, as he promised. So there we see the affirmation of God saying, this is it. This is it. This day, boom, you are my people, and we are one. I am yours, and together, as you continue to walk in my commands, and we'll see that coming up now. So this covenant renewal took place on the plains of Moab. The plains of Moab. And this was a renewal from the covenant made in Mount Sinai. And we did that last semester, which was in Exodus. So this is just nothing new. This is just a renewal. But of course, this is not the old generation. This is the new generation. So here we see again, mutual commitments have been made between God and the people of Israel. Number 2, Roman number 2 says alternatives for a God-related people. Excuse me. That's chapters 27 through 30. Letter A says consequences of obedience and disobedience. And here we have the writing the Torah on stones and covenant renewal. I put a little map there. I think the printer ate it up, half of it, but nevertheless. Number 1 says the altar on Mount Ebal. In chapter 27, 1 through 8. What takes place in this is it's kind of interesting. It probably could go into more research. One of those things you could probably look up. There's two mountains, Mount Ebal, you see it there on the map, and then there's Mount Gerizim, if I'm pronouncing that correct. And these mountains are side by side, close in proximity, which there's another picture. I just put in there so you have an idea, because I like to see sometimes, you see things. They were talking about, in this whole chapter, they're talking about God commanding Moses to set up tribes, 6 on one side and 6 on the other side. And then, you get into the whole thing of the mountain and where they're at, where they're allocated, and the Levites are supposedly in the middle. So there's like a whole picture. So I put it there to see, how this took place, because, again, there's no power amps or microphones back in the days. There's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a few of us in here and I have this thing on. So think about the multitude of people surrounded by this. So what happens is they set up on Mount Ebal, God commands Moses to set up the stones with the laws. So that's on that mountain. 6 of the tribes are set on that mountain, 6 of the tribes on the other mountain. What's interesting is from that Mount Ebal, where the stones are at, they're also going to build an altar. What was interesting is that mountain, supposedly the name of that mountain is, or the significance of that mountain is it's barren, dead, nothing. It's like rocky, nothing grows. And that's the same place where 6 of the tribes were to pronounce the curse of all who would break the law. So 6 tribes on that side pronouncing a curse, and then the rest of the tribe was on Mount Gerizim, and they were to repeat all the blessings that were to transpire. So it's just interesting to know, the laws. Now, the question I was wondering was, I wonder why or how God decided to put which 6 of the tribes, and he says, I want these 6 here, I want these 6 there. So it was one of those things I said, I wonder why. I don't know why. If you guys find out, let me know. So, all right, so the table of stones are to be set up in Mount Ebal, and the tables of the law were placed there as well, and they were made out of stone. They were not to use any iron tools for the altar built. The question is why? Why not build with some iron tools and get the right stuff and make it nice and sweet and just make it all gorgeous? Like, oh God, we want to give you the best, and we're going to. Well, God told them not to use any iron tools, but to use only field stones, which are stones that were uncut. And the reason behind this is that the people would not begin to worship the altars. Back in those times, the Canaanites and all them, they were building it with iron tools, with the best tools they had. They built the most awesome altars, and that's what eventually they would give into and they would worship, was those altars, because they were made out of the best craftsmen, the best tools. And God, of course, you see him again, now separating himself, like we said last week, separating himself from the rest of the world and doing things totally different. So in the event that they were to use these tools, something would come up really nice, and they would, of course, get the best, whatever, the guy who does the graphics on the thing and hook it up. So he's like, no tools whatsoever, just totally raw. Just whatever it is there, and then cover it with plaster. And Joshua later on was put the commandments right on it. So that was to prevent them from creeping little by little into idolatry. He also didn't want those stones cut or shaped into any form. Just the way they were, just put it together. The focus wasn't on that. The focus was on God, not on anything that they were going to make with their own hands. And then, again, the curses were read from that mountain, Mount Ebal. And the word Ebal, again, means, for those who are interested, it means barren. So it was almost like a sign for all those who are going to break this commandment, or his commands that he's written on this mountain. Basically, your life is that of the mountain. Barren, rocky, dead. Number 2, it says the curses from Mount Ebal. That's chapter 27, 9 through 26. Verse 15, there's sins of idolatry. All the curses pertaining to that. And then 16, 19, and the rest of them, you see them there. Sins against a fellow man, sexual sins, guilt and bloodshed, and concluding curse. The first one, we see it again, it's towards God. The curse of idolatry. Number one, like always, is towards God. And then, as you see, the rest happens to be, again, towards our fellow man. Sins against the fellow man, sexual sins. Letter B, idolatry was the most common offense that Israel committed against God. I think we've all have read back and forth and seen how many times they fell into the same old thing. Even when Moses was up on the mountain, they come back and he had Aaron, the people had made Aaron build an altar of gold. It just over and over and over again. They just continue to fall in idolatry. So again, idolatry was the most common offense that Israel committed against God. It was the first curse, followed by 4 which pertain to fellow man. Excuse me. Number 2 is the second curses. It's in a relationship with we have on earth. And actually, I think, let me see, verse 16 of 27 real quick. It says, the first one, I'll read number 15. Cursed is the man who carves an image or casts an idol, a thing detestable to the Lord, the work of the craftsman's hand, and sets it up in secret. Another thing was, as they pronounced these curses, and later on the blessings, everybody was sworn in the mountain, and everyone was supposed to confirm this, like ratify it, like we agree, and it was an amen, which declared it, like, I agree, I'm signing up for this. I heard it loud and clear, and amen. So after each one of these curses, there's an amen behind it. And then number 16, right after that, it says, cursed is the man who dishonors his father or his mother. And then all the people shall say amen. So number 1 is towards God, and the second one, the curse, is towards, interesting enough, towards our mom and pops. And thinking about it, that is probably our first relationship we ever really have. We don't have any other. We're not husbands first, or parents first, or wives first, but we are children first. We have mom and dad first. So that relationship is number 2, right after God. No idolatry, and honor your father and your mother. So there you see the rest of them, and they all conclude with the amen. Moving right along. Okay, these divine curses that they spoke out on the mountain made all Israel aware of the fact that they were accountable to God, not men or judges. A lot of these things, they could get away with it behind closed doors, but as they verbally agreed to this in front of the whole tribe, the whole nation of Israel, in front of God, the heavens, the earth, everybody, they confirming it. You know what? This is between you and God. You're saying amen, it's between you and God. You might get away with something, sure, from the judges later on and the Levites, but at the end of it all, you're held accountable. This is between you and God will come after you, as we'll see later on. He will come after you. So their relationship was primarily with God out of love, which then translated into his fellow man. It always starts with love towards God. After that, once we have our love towards God, everything else comes in. Okay. So the other mountain, going back to that mountain, Gerizim, it's also an interesting fact that mountain was more flourishing. It had like a spring around it or something. It was very green, very full of life. And that's the mountain where they stood to confess the blessings. And suppose that's the same mountain, I was reading, they're not sure, the same mountain they believe that, that Abraham was going to sacrifice his son Isaac. And that's the same mountain where Jesus is talking to the woman at the well. It says, the time is here, we worship here in the mountain, but you guys say it's in Jerusalem. Well, the whole thing kind of points to this mountain. Because there, supposedly till today, the Samaritans, they still have that mountain, like that's where they have the Passover feast and all that, because they think that's the place to worship God. When this all happened, they took it like that mountain is the mountain. So when the woman's talking to Jesus and telling him, we worship in this mountain, but you Jews say, she's actually talking about that mountain, because ever since then, that's where they've said, this is it, this is it, this is the holy of holies for them, and they've worshipped God there. And to today, they still have a thing around there, if you look it up, and they're still their Passover feast and all that. They do their worship things right there. So there's a thing there with that. And supposedly, for a Samaritan to become a Jew, a full Jew, he needs to renounce that place, because the place of worship is Jerusalem. So they're supposed to like renounce and like say, have nothing to do with that. Jerusalem is the place. So that's like the mountain of, I guess, the mountain of blessing. It's also close to where Jacob had his dream. And not too far from that same mountain is where Abraham meets Melchizedek. Letter D. Are we in D? Okay, letter D. Blank for 3. Idolatry. Letter D, covenant blessings and curses, Deuteronomy 28, 1 through 68. Excuse me. Here we have the blessings for obedience and the curses for disobedience. 28, 1 through 19. There we see God's favor. And number 2, Moses presents to this new generation, again, this is the new generation going into the promised land once they get in, the alternatives of God's mercies and God's curses. There's 6 covenant blessings, and we'll read those real quick. 28, 1 through 6. And these are the blessings for obedience. If you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all his commands I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations on earth. All these things will come upon you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. Number 3 says, you will be blessed in the city and blessed in the country. The fruit of your womb will be blessed, and the crops of your land and the young of your livestock, the calves of your herds and the lambs of your flocks. Your basket and your kneading trough will be blessed. You will be blessed when you come in and blessed when you go out. And I think we've all heard these. That's awesome. That's awesome there. So there we see 6 covenant blessings, which you will be blessed in the city. 1, blessed in the country. 2, the fruit of your womb will be blessed is 3. And then we see your baskets will be blessed, and then you will be blessed when you come and go. So there's 6 there, as well as we see here, I guess later on we'll see the same 6 are the other way around. The same exact things are the other way around, but instead of blessings, they turn into curses. Letter B says promises expanding on the blessings, and that's 28, 7 through 10. And then there's a threefold blessing. We see progeny, livestock, and produce. And that progeny word refers to having children, your offspring. And then the promises expanding on the blessings, and that's 28, 12 to 14. And then the 6 curses, and that's the same, the opposite. And it says here, however, starting in verse 15, if you do not obey the Lord your God and do not carefully follow all his commands and decrees I am giving you today, all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. You will be cursed in the city and cursed in the country. Your basket and your kneading trough will be cursed. The fruit of your womb will be cursed, and the crops of your land and the calves of your herds and the lambs of your flocks. You will be cursed when you come in and cursed when you go out. I don't know, but I think I like the first one better, the obedience one. The blessings. With obedience comes blessings, and with disobedience comes the curses. Number 3, we have more of the covenant curse, and that's in Deuteronomy 28, 20 and 29 through 1. And there we see more of God's disfavor of all those who disobey and bring on the curse. And this is pretty much all up to them. And later on we read that it's a choice. God's give you a choice, me or blessings and obedience, or disobedience and curse, for generation to generation. Number 4, Moses portrays in extending warnings the disastrous results that will come if they disobey. Disastrous results if they disobey. And there's quite a few here with them. Letter A is the first. It's called the first expansion, and it deals with pestilence, famine, and disease. There's curses, there's confusion, and there's cumbrance, which is a troublesome burden. That's in verse 20. And then in 21 and 22, there's 7 afflictions from pestilence. Diseases until he was going to send diseases until he has destroyed them. Fever, inflammation, scorching heat, drought. These are 7 afflictions from pestilence. I'm going to read those just because they sound violent. 21:22 says, the Lord will plague you with diseases until he has destroyed you from the land you are entering to possess. The Lord will strike you with wasting disease, with fever and inflammation, with scorching heat and drought, with blight and mildew, which will plague you until you perish. Continue, it says, the sky over your head will be bronze, the ground beneath you iron. The Lord will turn the rain of your country into dust and powder. It will come down from the skies until you are destroyed. Again, we see God destroying them, annihilating them. Going on, it says 25, the Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You will come at them from one direction, but flee from them in 7. And you will become a thing of horror to all the kingdoms on earth. Your carcasses will be food for all the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and there will be no one to frighten them away. The Lord will afflict you with boils of Egypt, with tumors, festering sores, and the itch from which you cannot be cured. The Lord will afflict you with madness, blindness, confusion of mind. At midday you will grope about like a blind man in the dark. You will be unsuccessful in everything you do. Day after day you will be oppressed and robbed, with no one to rescue you. 30 says, you will be pledged to be married to a woman, but another will take her and vanish her. You will build a house, but you will not live in it. You will plant a vineyard, but you will not even begin to enjoy its fruits. Your ox will be slaughtered before your eyes, but you will eat none of it. Your donkey will be forcibly taken from you and will not be returned. Your sheep will be given to your enemies, and no one will rescue them. Your sons and daughters will be given to another nation, and you will wear out your eyes, watching for them day after day, powerless to lift a hand. A people that you do not know will eat what your land and labor produce, and you will have nothing but cruel oppression all your days. The sights you see will drive you mad. The Lord will afflict your knees and legs with painful boils again, that cannot be cured, spreading from the soles of your feet to the top of your head. Now all this is being said to them. So in the middle of all that, you think, wow, that has to hit them, so that later on they will never go back. They put it to them. I was reading something where it said they put it to them so clearly. God gave it to Moses so clearly that no one who was there that day was able to say, you know what? You know how we could hear things and you walk away and you go, I didn't get that. I'm not sure what he meant by disaster. Or I'm not sure what he meant. He's going to kill us all. No, whatever. I'm going to do my own thing. He put it clearly where whoever walked out that day, whoever confessed that day, they knew it. There was no turning back, or there was no, oh, that's what he meant. I didn't get it. It was clear and simple form where there was no way to get out of it. In other words, there was no way for them, when the curse came upon them, for them to go, God, how could this be? Where did this come? I never saw it coming. Because he told them clearly and plainly, this is what's going to happen to you. This is what I want you to do. This is what you need to do. And this is what's going to happen if you disobey. Clearly and plainly. So there was no excuses. So that we see 7 afflictions from pestilence, destruction from famine and the sword. Then there were 7 more afflictions, violent loss of family, home, and property. And then the second expansion is oppression, exile, and slavery. And then we see oppression that produces insanity. We're reading that. Afflictions from disease, more boils. Exile from the promised land of Israel, which eventually took place. Afflictions of pestilence and war, and impoverishment and debt. So there we see just nothing but bad news. Let us see, the third expansion is utter privation in siege warfare. And these curses will pursue them until they are destroyed. 28 45. It says, all these curses will come upon you. They will pursue you and overtake you until you are destroyed, because you did not obey the Lord your God and observe the commands and decrees he gave you. And there will be a sign and a wonder to you and your descendants forever. So not only will he destroy them, but it's going to be a sign for all those who look back and see. It's almost like they say when they're on one of these mountains reading the curses, supposedly when they overlooked, they were able to see the Dead Sea. And there it was almost a reminder of, ooh, that could be us. And that supposedly deals with Sodom and Gomorrah when God destroyed it. So it's a reminder of, remember what could happen to you. And remember all the things that God brought them out of. So the curses will pursue them until they are destroyed. Israel's utter privation and want of all things. And in 49 and 52, it's a military siege, and it deals with the undoing of God's blessing. 49:52, real quick, says, the Lord will bring a nation against you from far away, from the ends of the earth, like an eagle swooping down, a nation whose language you will not understand, a fierce-looking nation without respect for the old or pity for the young. They will devour the young of your livestock and the crops of your land until you are again destroyed. They will leave you no grain. They will leave you no grain, new wine or oil, nor any calves of your herds or lambs of your flocks until you are ruined. So there we see more total destruction, even to the point where 28, 53, and 57, there's even cannibalism. Interesting enough, verse 56 says, the most gentle and sensitive woman among you, so sensitive and gentle that she would not venture to touch the ground with the sole of her foot, will begrudge the husband she loves and her own son or daughter the afterbirth from her womb and the children she bears. For she intends to eat them secretly during the siege and in the distress that your enemy will inflict on you in your cities. So there we have a picture of, cannibalism. Mothers eating their children. And I think even one of the things I read was mothers having a baby and all the stuff that comes out when afterwards, them just chomping on that. Yeah, that just puts in perspective how severe. I mean, that's what I'm saying. God puts it so clear, so graphic. I mean, this is probably very graphic. Think about it. It's like, oh my God, it's so graphic that how could you, I guess we could have done the same. So I will never say, but thinking about it, how could they turn from God, taking all that he has done for the nation to this point, and then sitting with them and tell them, this is going to happen if you disobey me. The curses that will come will be, I am going to destroy you, annihilate you. You're going to eat your children. Everything that comes, you're going to eat whatever comes out. You're going to destruction. Everywhere you look will be destruction because you disobeyed. And on top of that, we see later on in the history of Israel that they still managed to go by the wayside. Okay, letter D, verses 58 through 68 of chapter 28, is the complete reversal of Israel's history. And what is Israel's history here pertaining to is they were, from Joseph, they were, he did everything for them, and they grew in number, and then they were a great nation, and they multiplied, and then they became slaves. So from the moment they became slaves until Moses jumps on the scene, he takes them out, all the miracles, the wilderness, the whole 9 yards until this point. Basically, this part speaks of the opposite occurring to them. Almost like everything that happened to the Egyptians and the plagues and all that, now it's going to come on you. Everything's coming back on you. And that's 58 through 68. They will experience the diseases of Egypt, everything that took place over there. Well, it didn't touch them, but this time it will. That's 58 through 61. Verse 62 of that chapter, their numbers will be decimated. Remember that we're talking about how they just multiplied and they were just countless, they couldn't keep up with them. Well, now we see the exact opposite. Verse 63, Yahweh takes delight in destroying them. Now, he takes delight in destroying them. So, his delight wasn't to rescue them, his people, to take them out of slavery and to free them. And now his delight, as we read in 63, let me see how they put it. It says, just as it pleased the Lord to make you prosper and increase in number, so it will please him to ruin and destroy you. You will be uprooted from the land you are entering to possess. So there we see clearly that the Lord kind of delights in that in some way. 64 and 65, Yahweh will, and the word there is scatter. He will scatter them among the nations. And we know that they went everywhere. He was bringing them all together. Now they're scattered around. Yahweh will make them return to Egypt. 66 through 68. And that refers to the diseases of Egypt will be divinely released now upon them. So what they escaped, now they get. And this is, again, all the curses. This is warning. It's like warning, warning. It's clear. Number 5, remembering the past. Excuse me. Remembering the past, Deuteronomy 29, 1 through 9. And there's 3 accounts, 3 addresses of Moses in the whole book of Deuteronomy. And this is where the 3rd one begins. Moses' 3rd address, calling the people of Israel, calling for commitment. A is a summary. There is like a little menorah where we see A and E are similar, and B and D are similar. And letter C is like the main point of that chapter. Moses reminds the Israelites that they had witnessed and experienced what God had done for them during the wilderness experience. And that's throughout this whole chapter. So the summary is, these are the words of the covenant. And that's how it starts. That chapter, letter B, is Moses speaks about the Exodus from Egypt. Again, he's going over. It's a reminder. Okay, let me remind you guys. You guys went around, so this is what happened from Egypt until present. And letter C, God speaks. And he says, I am the Lord, your God. Letter D, again, Moses speaks. And he speaks of the conquest of the 2 Amorite kings in the Transjordan. We did that last class, I believe. And letter E is, again, summary. And this one, letter A was, these are the words of the covenant. And this one is, you shall keep the words of this covenant. And that's chapter 29, verse 9. And the reason is so that you may prosper in everything you do. Roman numeral 3 is the appeal for covenant loyalty. We see the verse in the chapter there. Letter A, the covenant is building on future generations as well. So not only is this covenant for the present, for all those who are there now hearing under the voice of Moses and all the leaders speaking this, but this is also to be remembered generation to generation to generation. And also those stones that were placed there with the laws, supposedly it was the 10 commandments on that Mount Ebal, those are supposed to be a reminder again, and all those in the future generation were to go to the mountain and they would see this is where God established this covenant, which was actually made before, but this is where we renewed it just before we entered the promised land. So that's a constant reminder. It's like constant reminder so that you can never forget, your children can never forget, their children, generations. Next line says the whole community, there the fill-in should be the whole community, stood before God, which was that present generation. So everybody, it was man, woman, boy, and child, everybody, even the children, everybody was there. Everybody heard everything. So no one can say, wow, I missed that day, I didn't hear. What happened? There was no, basically there was no escape. So the whole community stood there before God, that present generation. Verses 12 to 14, they were entering into the covenant, and Yahweh establishes them as his people. There in these 2 verses, 29, 12, 14, it says, you are standing here in order to enter into a covenant with the Lord your God, a covenant the Lord is making with you this day and sealing with an oath, to confirm you this day as his people and that he may be your God as he promised you, and as he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I am making this covenant with this oath, not only for you, not only with you, who are standing here with us today in the presence of the Lord our God, but also with those who are not here today. And there the reference is generations to come. They're to continue this for generation to generation. Letter B, those with reservations about keeping the covenant are warned. And the warning here, I think there's a fill in there. Warning, warning, warning. Idolatry precipitates God's wrath. In other words, you want God's wrath? Put something before him. Put an idol, put something, anything, for us today, whatever. Money, work, job, family, kids. So put something in front of God, and that will precipitate his wrath. But thank God for his grace. Thank God we're not living in those times. Thank you, Jesus. Letter C, exile from the promised land is foretold for breaking the covenant. There we see that later generations shall see the devastated land, which evidently we know what happens. And later generations will look back, who had nothing to do with this, and they'll look back and they'll go, wow, what happened to our land? And they'll see, that, my friend, was the curse brought up by those before you. Their disobedience and their idolatry, which was the main culprit. And they will ask why, and the answer will be because they broke covenant. Exile and destruction are covenant curses. Exile and destruction. You look at the beginning. Let's say you look at kind of interesting Genesis, beginning, Adam and Eve, and you see what happens to them because of their disobedience. And they only have one rule, basically, right? Just don't eat from that tree. And their punishment, their curse, they were cursed right there and then, was pretty much exile and destruction. And that's the same that happens to the Israelites. They were in the garden. They were there. They had it all good. They had it all. They didn't need to work for the land. It's almost very similar to this. It's like a parallel there. This land flowed, the promised land flowed with milk and honey. It was going to just fertile soil, just you name it. Oh. Adam and Eve, they didn't need to do anything. The land grew. I couldn't imagine how everything just grew on its own. Just pick it and eat it. Well, the disobedience brought the curse, exile. What happened? Kicked out. The garden, kicked out. We know they put the angel on the front, nobody's to come in. Again, we see with God's people, he gives them the promised land, and later on we find out they disobey, and he kicks them out. So we see exile in the beginning, and exile during the time of the promised land. Letter D is secrets and revealed things, and that's 29:29. That's an interesting little verse. It says, that's the last verse there. It says, the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may follow all the words of this law. The secret things. Well, God hasn't revealed everything to us. We know that. He has the secrets, and maybe one day we'll know them. Maybe when the time is right. Maybe when we're mature enough. But those things that are revealed, that's what we are responsible for. And that's what they were responsible for. God revealed all this information to them, and now they're responsible to act it out in love and obedience. So man is responsible to respond in love and obedience to God according to that which God has revealed. And that's from the book that we've been reading. So we don't know everything, but what God has given us, has revealed to us, that is, we need to respond with that in love and obedience. Letter E, possibility of restoration. And there is possibility. So after this long curses and all this disaster and eating your children and all this crazy stuff, now there is a possibility of restoration, which is a good thing. When you return, God will return. That's from chapter 30, 1 through 10. Number 1 says, the possibility of returning to God is there. The possibility of returning to God is there. And we find that in chapter 30, 1 through 5. Real quick, it says, when all these blessings and curses I have set before you come upon you, and you take them to heart, wherever the Lord your God disperses you among the nations, and when you and your children return to the Lord your God and obey him with all your heart and with all your soul, according to everything I command you today, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have compassion on you and gather you again from all the nations where he scattered you. Even if you have been banished to the most distant land under the heavens, from there the Lord your God will gather you and bring you back. So now we see there is a positive twist to all this. Not a twist, but there is renewal, there is restoration. And there we see, as we read there, the heart. It says here, the heart, go back to that, and you take them to heart wherever the Lord your God disperses you. Later on in that verse 6, it says, the Lord your God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants, so that you may love him with all your heart and with all your soul, and you may live. So there, the heart was the center of the will. Our heart is the center of our will. The heart needed to be circumcised. It needed to be circumcised with two things, and not so much the circumcision that they did in the natural, but this was the circumcision that God really cared about. And that was the circumcision of the heart, which cut off all of our self-ambitions and cut off our stubbornness, which you see what happens with the people of Israel, the stubbornness. I think I recall, I forgot who, somebody has said, or at least I've heard it before, why did God choose the Israelites? Why them? Why he made them his people? From all the people in there, why them? And one response I heard was the reason why he chose them was because he knew if he could get them in all their stubbornness to love him, they were like the most stubborn people. If he could get them to love him, then he could get the whole world to love him. It's after that, supposedly, that circumcision of the heart. So they were very stubborn people. Number 2, it says, when you return, God will return the covenant blessings. And that's in chapter 30, 6 to 10. Again, we are told if they love God with all their hearts and with all their souls, all these things will be restored back to them. Letter B, if they return and do all his commandments, then Yahweh will bless them with his covenant blessings. And that's in 8 and 9. It says, you will again obey the Lord and follow all his commands I am giving you today. Then the Lord your God will make you most prosperous in all the work of your hands and in the fruit of your womb, the young of your livestock and the crops of your land. The Lord will he again will delight in you and make you prosperous, just as he delighted in your forefathers. If you obey the Lord your God and keep his commands and decrees that are written in this book of the law, and turn to the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. And we see the emphasis of our hearts. Letter F, God's commands are doable. These weren't commands that were that were too crazy to fulfill. That's in chapter 30, 11 through 14. These commandments, letter A, these commandments were not too hard. They were not too hard for them. Like I said earlier, these commands were made simple enough, like I said earlier, where there was no need to ever come back and say, I didn't get that. So it was simple for every man, every woman, boy, and child. They all understood. Letter B says, the words of God are near to them. Let me read that real quick. It says, nor is it beyond the sea, verse 13, so that you have to ask, who will cross the sea to get it and proclaim it to us so we may obey it? No, the word is very near to you. It is in your mouth and in your heart, so you may obey it. So the Word of God it was right there, right close to them. Letter G says the choice now is before them. This concludes the section of chapter 30, verses 15 through 20. So the choice is before the nation of Israel. Number one, God has set before them the choice between life and death. That's a fill-in right there. Life and death. The command is to love God by obeying Him, and He will bless them in the land they possess. The main ingredient to them was love God, and this was the first or foremost. Without this, nothing else really mattered. If you don't love God, nothing else really matters. And the decision to love or not to love God was one of one of life's major decisions. So for them, it was all right there. It was put, after all this is said and done, it concludes now in this verses where, okay guys, this is Moses saying, this is it. This is, after this, I can no longer do this. You guys are entering the promised land. There's a choice. We all have choices in life. There's a choice in front. Adam and Eve had a choice. Throughout the Bible, there's been many choices. And to the nation of Israel, He says, up to here, they have to decide. Curses, blessings, obedience, disobedience. The choice had to be made by them. In the same way, probably one of our biggest decisions in life is to whether or not to follow Christ. B says, if they turn from God to worship other gods, again, they bring it up, then they will be destroyed. Number 2, so choose life by loving Yahweh your God. Letter A, God commands them and us to choose life by loving God and by obeying Him. (30:17) says, but if your hearts turn away and you are not obedient, and if you are drawn away to bow down, again, idolatry, to other gods and worship them, I declare to you this day that you will certainly be destroyed. You will not live long in the land you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. This day I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you that I have set before you, there's a choice, life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God. Listen to His voice and hold fast to Him, for the Lord is your life, and He will give you many years in the land He swore to give to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So that concludes his final talk about this. So there we conclude there with chapter 30, and it's basically Moses just giving them again the choice of life or death. We just like the Israelites must decide to love God with all our hearts and with all our souls, but not only commit to that verbally, but also maintaining that love by continuing to obey God. So not only do they and we have to say, you know what, God, or now we have, now that Jesus has come by His grace, we say, Jesus, I have decided to follow you. And we make that commitment, which is a huge commitment. Every Sunday we love to see the hands raised and say, wow, a new convert. And say, man, they gave their life to Christ. They're probably the biggest choice, because it's an eternal choice, our spirituality. And but not only does it stop there, but that's where we also have to, like the church is doing with the classes of Starting Point, continue this, because the decision is made to follow Christ, but then what happens after? So not only is it to say, Lord, like the song says, I have decided to follow Jesus, but then in our daily lives, like as they walked daily, as God walked with the Israelites throughout the years while they were wandering, it was a daily relationship. It's a daily walk, and it's a walk of obedience. Because we could say things until we're blue in the face, and not really walk in obedience of God. So not only to love God and say it, but to maintain that love by continually obeying God. The blessings will come if we do, and the curses await them who don't. So that concludes today's class.